Hi, everyone. Welcome back. If you want to take your seats, Hi, welcome back. If you weren't here in the last session, my name is Anka Gurzu, and I'm the Chief Europe Correspondent for Cypher News. In the last sessions, we heard about some of the technologies that Dr. Toon spoke about in the morning, and now we're going to go even deeper to look at specific solutions. So we're just going to jump right into it, and I would like to welcome on stage Christina Karapataki, partner at Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Welcome.
Thank you, Anka. Hi, everyone. How's the event going so far? Probably. Woo! Excellent. My name is Christina Karapataki. I'm a partner with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and I'm very excited to open this panel that is all about the amazing entrepreneurs that we get to work with every day at BEV. So since we began at work at BEV, we have invested in over 110 companies. And what we will do in the next hour is to highlight the solutions in the power, transmission, and hydrogen sector, and give you the opportunity to hear directly from those CEOs that are building those companies. Technology innovation is at the cornerstone of what we do at BEV, and it's also at the cornerstone for the clean energy transition. Our goal to BEV is to reduce the green premium and build scalable solutions that can deploy at scale. So, as already said this morning, we need to spend this decade scaling technologies. We must quadruple global electricity generation by 2050, and we need to do that with clean energy sources. That increase will demand a change on how we power our grid, how we build transmission, and how we operate it. So, and there's no doubt that solar and wind is now dominating new generation capacity, and it's 75% of new capacity in the US last year was from solar and wind. And I actually found this statistic quite staggering. In 2010, it took a whole year to build 1 gigawatt of solar. In 2016, it took about a month. And in 2023, it took a single day to deploy 1 gigawatt of solar installation. So there's now no doubt that there is a path for feasible deep decarbonization in the power sector. However, we all know wind and solar is not the full solution. Eric already walked us through all the challenges with that this morning in the great panel session. But can wind and solar grow and scale? Absolutely, yes. Can it scale to 4 times generation capacity? That's questionable. So there's a massive need to concurrently build baseload, and we're going to hear on those technologies. At BEV, we're investing across the board from advanced nuclear solutions, fusion, geothermal, and pumped hydro. And of course, we cannot talk about electricity without talking about transmission. In order to get to a net zero grid, we need to increase capacity in the transmission grid by 2 to 4 times by 2050. This is an unprecedented rate. Just to put it in perspective, that's a 5% annual growth rate in transition capacity. And over the last 4 decades, the annual growth rate was 2%. So there's a reason it is critical to ensure that existing transmission lines can be reconductored to carry more power. And we're going to hear from entrepreneurs in that sector as well right now. It will take planning, permitting, and establishing who pays in order to completely reconduct the transmission infrastructure. And the innovators we have are working on all the problems I just mentioned, from power generation to transmission. So with no further ado, I want to introduce the CEOs on stage. First one, Tim Latimer, CEO of Fervo, building net generation geothermal capacity. You can join me on stage, guys. Eric Brown, CEO of Planted Solar. Uses robotics and automation to speed up the deployment of solar technologies. Tim Heidel, CEO of Veer. Working on superconducting electric transmission technology that can increase the capacity of existing lines by 5 to 10x. And Jason Huang, CEO of TS Conductor. They're manufacturing and selling Nova conductor technology that can go on existing rights of way. So with that, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Tim, I'd like to start with you. Geothermal has not been getting its fair due in terms of proportion into the electricity grid. But there has been a lot of developments in geothermal projects, and there's also been recent announcements by Fervo Energy with Google and Southern California Edison. So can you talk a little bit about the projects that you're working on and the collaborations you're seeing with utilities?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's been a great conference so far. So, geothermal energy has been around for a long time, and in the context of energy transition, it has kind of checks all the boxes of what you want in a resource. It works 24/7. It's carbon-free. It has a very low footprint. It can be built very quickly. And so, why it hasn't been part of the conversation, or why has it not really taken off yet? If we think about, and we're a developer in the U.S., so I always think about this in the U.S. context. If you think about market demand in the U.S., when we started the company in 2017, basically nobody was interested in buying geothermal power. And I think a lot of that is complacency. You look at emissions, the most ambitious, when we started the company in 2017, the most ambitious renewable portfolio standard was only 20% in the whole country. Now there's a growing number of states that have 100% carbon-free energy standard. The grid had not had a major reliability event in over a decade, and so there was complacency about reliability, and there was complacency about demand. Demand had stagnated in the U.S. electric sector for about 20 years. And so you sort of fast forward to today, and all three of those things are completely different now. You have a very ambitious climate standards in many states. You had rolling blackouts in California in 2020. We had Winter Storm Uri in Texas in 2021. Energy reliability is back on the agenda, and then load growth is here, with a vengeance. You look at AI and hydrogen and electric vehicles and everything. Every single IRP now is coming out with the chart keeps looking steeper and steeper for load growth. And so we've seen enormous demand for our product in geothermal, and it was great timing for us because the other reason geothermal struggled to scale is people didn't really believe the technology could work there. So we brought our pilot project online with Google in 2023. It's been producing for almost a year now. And so right when all these demand forces were calling for more geothermal, we've got a proven product ready to scale. So the Google deal, the SCE deal that we announced in the last couple weeks, that now takes us as a company to over $5 billion of contracted revenue through power purchase agreements through our portfolio in the West. And we're really just getting started with that because we've got a very scalable technology, hitting the market at a time when the things we offer, reliability, low emissions, and answering the load growth question are really top of mind for the electric grid.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's great to see the growth of Fervo. We invested in the company as BAV back in 2018. I see some of the early investors in the room as well. So it's been amazing to see how the company is growing. Eric, in solar, we've seen tremendous growth in the industry. We've seen solar module costs drop as low as 10 cents per watt. What do you see as the next frontier in terms of deploying solar power plants, and how's Planted Solar deploying automation and robotics for that?
Great. Thanks, Christina. I think to put the current moment in context, we've collectively around the globe deployed 1.5 terawatts of solar PV in these roughly 15 years of cascading module prices declines. And we still have a lot of room to grow with a huge need for speed and scale ahead of us, while you can still celebrate the momentum that's already there. And so I think the targets for decarbonization are probably closer to 75 terawatts of cumulative PV on grid by 2050, by some estimates. That's a huge step change overall. So that equates to 3 terawatts per year every year for the next 25 years. So we're not even close to the level of deployment capacity that's required for that. Modules can generally keep up. That's a manufacturing problem going forward. But the rest of the CapEx stack is really what's left over. And so I think to echo the stat of new demand pull coming on the grid, I think the CEO of NextEra last week said they're anticipating a 40% power demand increase in the next 20 years, or growth in the next 20 years. In the last 20 years, there was only 9% growth. So there's a huge pull coming from onshoring manufacturing, data centers, you name it. We're starting to build stuff again, and we need to figure out how to power it with clean sources, which is wind, water, solar, storage, geothermal, that's ready to deploy now and ready to go. And so I think for the planted side of it, we're focused on decoupling future development and deployment from land, skilled labor shortages, and steel, and being able to enable stuff to go a lot faster by completing projects 3 times as fast, by taking out a number of the hurdles that are in front of you for finding and developing good sites, and really quality stuff overall. So I think if anybody needs a dose of optimism, the Economist Sun Machines essay from last week was phenomenal. Gets you pretty excited about where things are today. It's also really, really focused on manufacturing at its core. It's really celebrating the fact that module costs have declined substantially. They've gone down 90% in roughly 10 years. And so that's like a manufacturing problem where the more CapEx you put into it, the more scale you get, the more deployment you get, the lower the cost of the module. There's still 80% of the CapEx stack left over in deployment and construction. And that's really what we're focused on solving by adding more speed, higher throughput, higher reliability to the problem.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. So moving on to transmission, we know siting and permitting has been the biggest source of delays in the transmission space. Tim, what can we do to rapidly expand grid expansion, and where do you see VIR playing a key role in that?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. I'm excited to be here. It's amazing how far we've come in the transmission conversation in the last couple of years. We started this company in 2020, and at the time, transmission was very much a backwater. If you looked at all of the decarbonization studies that have been published over the years, just about every one of them concluded that we needed to triple transmission capacity to cost-effectively achieve decarbonization. And when we looked at that, we were laying the groundwork for building VIR, we came to the conclusion that without unlocking very rapid transmission capacity growth around the world, we are simply not going to decarbonize. And I feel like that is now a theme that has become front and center, and you're hearing it throughout this meeting. The reality is we need a ton of transmission, and yet we all don't like transmission. Transmission is a linear infrastructure that is super complex to build, that towers over the landscape and faces NIMBYism, public opposition, and very complex siting and permitting battles everywhere you go. We routinely hear from utilities in Europe that the window of opportunity for building new transmission in new overhead right-of-ways has closed and will never reopen. Thus, future transmission expansion relies on existing right-of-ways or underground development. The problem is underground development is very expensive. At VIR, we're developing a new generation of superconducting transmission lines that can carry 5 to 10 times more power in the same exact right-of-way space as what you have deployed historically. That means we can use existing right-of-ways and dramatically increase the capacity of those right-of-ways, eliminating the need to build brand new lines. Or if you're going to go build a new line, we can build that line at lower voltage. Much higher current with higher efficiency. Historically, the only way to get to high power is through high voltage, which means tall towers and wide right-of-ways. So when we can carry more power at far lower voltage, we can carry that in a really compact footprint that avoids a lot of the public opposition, sidesteps a lot of the siting and permitting battles, and our goal is to be able to deploy a lot of transmission capacity a lot faster, whether that's connecting customers to the grid or upgrading the bulk transmission system around the world. Excited to be here.
Excellent. And Jason, TS Conductor is already out there. You're selling product to some of the top tier utilities like National Grid and TVA. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges you're seeing in conductoring new, existing lines, and how the utilities are responding to introducing this new technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you look at energy transition, we believe in, and I think the industry also believes in, the need for energy transition with affordability, with urgency, and with practicality, which is something that's often not talked about. There are going to be new lines that's going to be built, and the generations are in different locations. There's a need to balance power between different regions as well. But by and large, there are huge opportunities for society, for our power grid to leverage, which is the existing rights of way, and really look at advanced conductor options to double or triple line capacity. We have been blessed with a very exciting technology that can triple the line capacity on the same structure in the existing rights of way without any retrofit. This is very important because if you have to retrofit the towers, make them taller to accommodate more sagging, or they're pulling more tensions, you have to strengthen the cross arm, that's going to cost more money. It's also going to require more outage time schedule to do the work. And for new lines, utilities are becoming much more sensitive on cost as well. We can help the utility to do these new lines with fewer and shorter structure because the platform itself is low sag and allows you to span the towers a lot further apart. Many people don't know the cost of conductor in a new transmission line, they're only in the 1%, 2%, 3% range. The structural part of the cost can be as much as 30%. Yes, you can deploy green technology with a green discount on project level cost.
And can you comment a little bit, Jason, on the opportunities you see in the US versus the rest of the world and where you're seeing most of the traction?
Yeah, I think US is in a way unique compared to the rest of the world. A lot of the foreign countries, you have a monopoly utility that covers the entire country. We, on the other hand, have probably well over 100 investor-owned utilities and then thousands of the munis and the co-ops. So it is a target-rich environment in the US. We benefit from that tremendously because there are utilities that make decisions by committee. It is slow, risk-averse, and by and large, they are regulated utility. I heard one executive telling me that, Jason, we are a regulated utility, we're not normal people. You have to respect that. Keep in mind, what your customer likes, right? So while we patiently work with the big utilities that are slow, follow their protocol, we have the latitude and opportunity to work with the more nimble utilities like TVA, NextEra, and Beijing Electric. And they made this company already profitable in a very short time. So we have been very blessed with our customers. But if you go overseas to the international market, you have one monopoly utility. You don't have much of a choice, and you just have to follow their process and the protocol and understand what they really care about. And this is why the practicality of a solution matters. There's an intense focus on safety, reliability, longevity. The solutions that we bring to utility, we have to keep that in mind in order to have a broader and a faster adoption of technology by our utilities.
Excellent, thank you. And to shift gears, at BV, we focus a lot on the deployment of the technology, right? Especially at this decade. And of course, that comes with first-of-a-kind financing and project development. So maybe I'll ask Tim to start on how you're seeing the first-of-a-kind financing market for geothermal and for new power generation in general.
Well, when you said geothermal, I know you were talking to this Tim and not that Tim.
Yeah, and
But first-of-a-kind financing is a hard enough topic. I was kind of hoping to punt it to him. But
it's coming next, don't worry.
It is interesting, and I thought the framing this morning in the session was good to talk about how breakthrough was formed in the wake of the Clean Tech 1.0 bust, and there was really not a lot of capital available at all for any climate tech company, really from 2010 through 2015 or 16. And so it's fascinating. There's now a lot of companies that are sort of the same vintage, 2017, 18, 19, that could only access early stage capital then. And so everybody's hitting the same challenges at the same time. And so the reason everyone's talking about first of a kind financing right now is because it's the topic that everyone that's trying to scale in the climate ecosystem right now is facing all at the same time, and there has not traditionally been great structures for it. So I think one of the things we did with our first project that was very helpful is getting, whenever you look at the more risk-averse financiers, once you move beyond venture, they need to see their checklist of things in the project, the right engineering in place, the right offtake agreement in place, the right permits in place. And so one thing that helped us a lot on Project Red, our pilot, was Google stepped in very early as a customer, even back in 2021, before we ever drilled a well. And that gave people a lot more comfort around, bringing in and financing that project. And now as we move forward to scale up, I think a lot of it is about making sure that you're checking those boxes with very, reputable partners across the board. So we've now very well proven our drilling technology. Our pilot project, we actually didn't build the power plant though. So we're doing that for the first time. And so we went through and made sure that as we talk about procuring our turbine and power plant equipment, we partnered with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries actually on that, because we find that's a great way to get people comfortable with that first-of-a-kind risk if you're bringing in the right partners that have that track record of success there. So I think that it's something that's going to be solved. There's tons of creative ideas around that now, but I think still a lot of the burden is still on the portfolio companies to make sure we're fitting into that very rigid checklist that the traditional project finance community has.
And Mr. Heidel, with that opening, I have to come to you next. Right? So whenever we're thinking of first-of-a-kind financing, we're thinking of projects, but how are utilities reacting to reconducting existing lines? Are the utilities financing it, or does the company need to go through a project development cycle as well?
Well, so we're working on that now, and I think as Jason mentioned correctly, safety, reliability, availability, lifetime is really essential. And we don't, unfortunately, in the transmission world, have the equivalent of the PPAs that have ultimately paved the way for a lot of generation technologies. We're core to the network, we're part of a planned system, and because of that, I think the very first project you deploy is often going to have to be in a location where it is redundant against existing infrastructure, or it's in a safe place of the grid where they can really gain comfort with it and confidence with it, and they can see it operate fully, but it may not have a business case that immediately closes. And so we're really working through that a lot. I think we're seeing a ton of urgency on the part of customers recognizing how urgent this need is. We're seeing a lot of folks that are having trouble connecting new assets to the grid as well. And so we're starting to see, hey, let's build this to see how it works, make sure that we understand how that works. And the faster we do that, the faster we can implement it in much larger projects down the road. And so I think that's going to become a really important concept for us, but it's definitely an unsolved problem in the system itself, as opposed to the generation connecting to it.
And Eric, one question for you. People, whenever they think of siting constraints, usually they wouldn't think of solar, but we're seeing now some areas where there's opportunity for restricted land sites and limited interconnects. So can you comment a little bit on whether that presents an opportunity and how you're targeting that?
Yeah, I think and again, we're a little bit US-centric, I guess, here overall, but as the IRA is really picking up its full steam this year, we're starting to see more and more deployment in areas that have not traditionally experienced a lot of solar growth too. So there's a press for doing things that aren't on the easy sites anymore. So you're picking projects that either have land constraints, far from interconnection, geotechnical risk, hydrology risk, whatever you have it, you name it. So there's a need and a pull from the solar industry overall, on the development side especially, to have more optionality for a flexible development approach. And so we focused pretty early on to make a higher density array that could use about half the land of a conventional tracker system that could be built to just conform to the site rather than having to do meaningful grading work, which just like chips away at taking away one more barrier from things that typically could kill projects. Because so much is locked in at the siting level, and if you have pretty good momentum to be able to get clearance and permitting and a good project developed that's not going to have a lot of construction risk because you've stripped it out on the front end, you can build that project much faster and get it online easier too. So more projects are now being designed and developed that are still in the 500 megawatt scale or 800 megawatt scale in Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, which aren't traditionally the areas where you would have thought 15 years ago solar was going to be the future, but it's happening on sometimes 5 or 30 different parcels for those 800 megawatt projects. So developers have to work really hard to get land rights secured from potentially 30 different property owners, stitch them all together with different connector feeders, and there's a huge drive to opportunities to cut that down. So if I can build on 15 parcels instead of 30, negotiate with 15 neighbors instead of 30, it helps to drive that forward a lot more.
Excellent. And really tough lightning round, about 20 seconds, 30 seconds each. We have a lot of investors, policymakers, utility stakeholders in the room. What would be like a key ask that you would have to promote adoption both for power and transmission broad, but really tough lightning round? Jason?
The obvious one for me is we have been ignoring the efficiency in the power grid for far too long. We have made tremendous progress on the generation side and on the consumption side. Just look at your kitchen appliances. I think for the regulators, policymakers, I would love to see regulation has room, has policy that recognize the value of efficiency provided by the right advanced conductor. That, if leveraged properly, can pay and subsidize for the cost associated with grid upgrade. That can be transformational.
Yeah, so I think we need to hold up transmission and the grid and recognize it as a core innovation area for clean energy on the same par as storage and clean, firm, dispatchable power and hydrogen, et cetera. I don't think it is always recognized as clearly as an enabler for mitigating climate change and helping us decarbonize.
I think lots of really important reasons for the US and the EU to lead with securing their strategic supply of all the critical components that go into building out a clean energy supply chain, but ensuring that we don't put the development of new energy resources at odds with domestic manufacturing and create tension there. So it's like having the right balance of carrots and sticks, ideally having carrots before you put the sticks in place. We saw in 2022 that module imports froze for a few months, and that shut down utility scale development for 6 months, and we can't have more of those instances pop up. So balancing policy certainty is a big priority for us.
Haven't finished out?
Yeah, geothermal is always an afterthought, and I think as a result, there's a lot of misconceptions about it. But I want people to pay attention to the recent data that our industry has had. There's been a breakthrough in geothermal. It's an entirely new type of way of doing geothermal, and it's now proven. And we're all about scale. You know, we're often forgotten about in policy conversations. We're often forgotten about in customer conversations. And we actually don't need necessarily science help. We need actually scale help. And that's where we are as an industry right now. And we just need to increase the awareness of that's where geothermal sits today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Round of applause for the panelists. And please visit the innovation showcase for the companies.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting conversation. It's great to hear about all the innovations that entrepreneurs are working for in the power and transmission sector. So now we're going to jump into a 5-minute solution spotlight segment. And I would like to welcome on stage Bob Mumgaard, the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems.
Thank you. All right. So now for something completely different. We heard this morning about we need to expand the different options we have for generating energy at its source. Not just how we move it around and not just dealing with the energy that the planet is sort of already resourced with. And so my job is to give some education on fusion. I'm qualified to do this. I have a PhD in plasma physics, which means this is one of the few things I'm actually qualified to do. So, what is fusion? So fusion is the reaction. It's the process that built all the atoms, most of all the atoms, all of you. It's the process that the universe has used to generate all the energy. And really it is the process inside the stars. It's the combining of light atoms to make heavier atoms in the process, E equals mc squared, you get a lot of energy. How much energy? If you think about like that bottle of water that you probably consumed in this hot venue, that bottle of water has enough fuel in it to power your entire Western life for your entire lifetime, right? That's the level of energy density we're talking about. And what that means is if you're able to make that reaction happen, you could put it inside a machine. You would build a machine that made effectively a star in a bottle. And that machine would be a machine that was like built. It was manufactured. It would be like an aerospace object that we would make, like the other types of energy technologies that we've developed already. And you put that in a plant, and you could capture the heat, and you could turn that to electricity and put it on the grid. And this is an intriguing stepwise thing to do, because if you were to do it, it meant that energy would not be about the resource of where it was or can you capture it. It would be about can you build it? Can you manufacture it? Can you install it? And once you did, you would have energy forever. So I'm going to talk about where the world is in each of these steps using Commonwealth Fusion Systems as an example. So first, that science of making the reaction happen, we know that works. The stars worked. We're here. We're full of atoms. But actually making it happen on Earth, you need to make the right conditions. And if you get the right conditions, which is like 100 million degrees, so hotter than the center of the sun, with enough stuff together, you get up in the upper right of this plot. It's a log-log plot. I'm an MIT guy, so I have to have a graph. And you would get more power out than in from the reaction itself. And all these dots are machines that have been built around the world. And so we're actually pretty far down this curve. And in fact, recently, we just had a machine in California make more power out than in for the first time ever by humanity, like a real big win. And beyond that, there's now machines that are being built, including the one I'm going to talk about, that are predicted to make like 10 times more power out than in, and to do it in an industrial setting. And that one there is Spark, a machine that we are building. So that science is now at the level we understand it, we can harness it. Well, okay, let's turn it into a path. You end up building machines. This is a tokamak. This is Spark, which we're building now. The only render of it, you'll see pictures of it later. That is the scale, and it's based on tokamaks that came before, and also a breakthrough in material science, a magnet technology to allow us to build much smaller machines. That's another thing that's happening in fusion, adjacencies. And that sets up a power plant that would be like a 400 megawatt power plant. So like replace a natural gas plant with a power plant. So where Commonwealth Fusion Systems is today is building a factory to make that machine. And that's not a hypothetical thing to do. I'm sorry, go back one. We're building this factory today outside of Boston. So we have if I can actually get the video to go. All right, 1,000, 2,000, 3. There we go. So this is a site. It was an Army base 3 years ago. There was nothing here. We built a factory that makes the parts for Spark. And what Spark will do is it will make more power out than in a commercially relevant machine for the first time ever. And you can see us here using a global supply chain to put all those pieces together for the first fusion machine. And what that machine looks like is this one. And this is about the full scale of a power plant. So inside here, we'll install the fusion machine, we'll install all the different subsystems, and we'll turn it on, and we're about halfway through that project of building it. We'll turn it on in 2026 and ramp it up in 2027. And so in 2027, we think we'll have a machine where you push a button, and you have a star inside a bottle, in a machine that's manufactured, installed in a plant, making somewhere around 100 megawatts of heat. And after that, the next step is to go build a commercial power plant, a machine that would do that a little bit larger and be hooked to the grid. And we're at the stage right now of actually negotiating the offtake for that, putting together the first-of-a-kind project financing for that, and identifying the site for that. And so we think the next one of these summits, 18 months to 2 years from now, we'll have Spark close to running, and we'll actually have the first commercial fusion power plant sited with offtake ready to start construction. And that, we think, looks like what a lot of the clean energy companies at this summit will eventually have to go through, going from science to how do you scale to getting it on the grid. And we think that's a very hopeful story. So if you're interested to learn more about fusion, find me. And also, if you're in the Boston area, look us up. Come see it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, I don't, yeah. Thank you very much, Bob, for that informative presentation. We'll keep things moving. And I would like to now welcome on stage Christian Garcia, his partner at Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Welcome. Do you need this?
I don't think so. Am I introducing them?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, a little bit of a mix-up here, but come on up, guys. We'll do introductions here. CEO and founder of Coloma, Pete Johnson. Pete. CEO and founder of H-Site, Andrés Galnares. And CEO and founder of Zuravia, Val. I won't try to pronounce your last name because I'll screw it up.
All right. We can
Well, welcome, guys. Thank you for making the time here. So we're going to talk about hydrogen. We're going to represent here the full value stream, upstream, midstream, and downstream, or put a different way, generation and production, transport and logistics, and demand. So starting off with Pete. So Pete, this morning, we got a bit of a preview of geologic hydrogen, which is your field, relatively new. Some people call it gold or white hydrogen. Eric maybe stole your thunder, but can you talk a little bit about what it is, why it matters, why you think it's a big deal as it relates to decarbonization?
Yeah, so look, geologic hydrogen as a concept has been around for a couple of decades. 3.5 years ago when Coloma was founded, nobody was really talking about it outside of a very, very small select group. And over the past 3 years, you've had New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. It's become rapidly a very exciting area of hydrogen. And I would say, there's almost nothing more hyped than hydrogen in clean tech, and now there's probably nothing more hyped than geologic hydrogen in hydrogen. And so we all have to be careful and recognize the excitement about geologic hydrogen is its potential to change energy transition, but there's still a lot of work to do. There's a lot of experiments, there's a lot of learning that needs to happen. We're trying to figure out how big this resource could be and how much of this resource is economically recoverable, but we're excited about what we're seeing.
That's great. So, right now we're at a time, we've talked about geologic, there's other ways to make hydrogen. Obviously, you can make it from natural gas, you can make it from renewables. There is a lot of investment right now in scaling up production, which is all going to come online relatively soon or in the next decade. Andrés, can you talk a little bit about what are the challenges around transport, logistics, storage, as this capacity comes online, and what are the things that H2 site solves in that respect?
Sure. Yeah, when we talk about coming online, it's actually funny because there are only 5,000 kilometers of hydrogen pipelines worldwide. And this is close to nothing, right? If we put it into perspective versus the 5 million kilometers of natural gas infrastructure for distribution and transport that we have worldwide, right? So how do you move hydrogen around? The best idea, well, the best option is actually not to transport it, right? And to use it next to the wells that Coloma is drilling. But if not, then you want the pipelines. So which pipelines? The hydrogen pipelines that are very scarce, or the natural gas pipelines where you blend hydrogen. But then the problem that you have is that when you blend it, you can only put a very small amount of hydrogen into these natural gas pipelines, right? So then you need to sort out what you're going to do to obtain the pure hydrogen at the consumption point. This is one of the things that we do, right? So we separate the hydrogen with a membrane-based solution at the consumption point. And the last option would be to say, do not transport hydrogen as such, but transport a molecule that meets 3 conditions. Condition number 1 is that it's commoditized from a production perspective, it's commoditized from a supply chain perspective, and that has a regulatory framework that is well defined. And there, you start talking about ammonia, you start talking about other carriers like methanol, like DME, like formic acid. And what we have developed within H2 site is a solution to extract at low cost, at low temperature, hydrogen out of these molecules, right?
Got it, thank you. So Val, it's interesting having you up here because you present a new use case for hydrogen. There are no certified commercial aircraft running on hydrogen today. Love to hear about, when you came off your last startup, what was it that made you believe in hydrogen as the right fuel source and energy source for aviation? And just tell us a little about what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. So ZeroAvia builds hydrogen electric engines for commercial aircraft, large aircraft going long distances. We believe hydrogen is the best fuel source for that. Stores enough energy on board the aircraft to actually, in a lot of applications, exceeds the amount of energy that you can store with fossil fuel, even by mass. And this is what we think will power aviation into the new future, where we need to not only get away from combustion of fossil fuels, but from combustion overall, because aviation is unique in the fact that most of the climate impact is actually non-carbon based. It's because of the high altitude combustion of fuel. When I sold my previous company, which was built the world's largest network of smart charging stations, and started ZeroAvia, the motivation for that was I'm a pilot myself. I wanted to see the industry leaving its bad reputation of high pollution, high climate impact, and I saw the future that if we build this technology and implement it in many, many types of aircraft, we can really connect the world in a much cleaner way. So we've done a lot of work towards that, and now the initial engines are in certification, both US and the UK, so we're on a great trajectory there.
That's great. Well, Pete, you mentioned something at the start, which is that your view of hydrogen being pretty hyped, or put a different way, I think it's one of the most exciting categories within climate. I'm curious, and maybe I'll ask the same question of each of you. Hydrogen's been around for a while. There have been kind of waves of enthusiasm and waves of skepticism. Same is true of fuel cells. For the folks that are kind of the ultra hydrogen bulls, what do you think that they get right? But maybe more interestingly, for the folks that are big skeptics of hydrogen, what is it the truth of their skepticism? What do they get right, and how do you think about that?
That's a good question. I remember 2002 buying a book when I was just about to graduate from physics, it said hydrogen opportunities and challenges, and it was written by NREL, and this is when the Bush administration was sort of pushing hydrogen for passenger vehicles. And then, I did some fuel cell research. I forgot about it. I worked in the solar industry, and then I got back into hydrogen when I founded Monolith Materials in 2012. And at that point, the world didn't really care about clean hydrogen. They really didn't. I was lucky to get a meeting with a low-level bureaucrat at the DOE. And 5 years down the road, Shell and BP said, hey, hydrogen is our molecule. We're gonna lean into this. And you started to see this really, really pick up. And I think the thing that drove the pickup is the recognition that electrification alone was not going to decarbonize and help us meet net zero. And I think that's what really drove the excitement about hydrogen and what it can offer in steel and materials and and all those things. So look, I think the Bulls get it right in the sense that there's so many areas of industry. If we're talking about a clean industrial revolution, there's so many areas in industry that you can't really address with electrification. And we can go down the list, but everybody's kind of talked about it. Steel, fertilizer, liquid fuels. If Val's successful, maybe SAF isn't going to matter, and we can fly hydrogen, which would be fantastic. I would say if you're a skeptic on hydrogen, the biggest area that I am a skeptic on is hydrogen for passenger vehicles, hydrogen for ferries, hydrogen for things that are actually fairly straightforward to electrify, and we've already kind of solved those solutions. I think that you may see a renaissance in hydrogen-powered transportation only after, if heavy trucking starts to adopt hydrogen, which I think is a very real possibility because of the weight of hydrogen is really advantageous. If heavy trucking adopts hydrogen, then you'll start to potentially see hydrogen refueling stations along interstates, and then you may see a renaissance of hydrogen-powered minivans and station wagons and road trip cars. But otherwise, I think that is where the bears on hydrogen are very well. I agree with them. I don't think hydrogen for passenger vehicles is going to be a thing.
Andrés, can you add to that and maybe give a little bit of a European flavor in terms of what's going on here? What is the sentiment in the continent of Europe and the UK? How it might differ, and just add to Pete's comments.
Sure. I think there is one thing that they are getting right, which is that hydrogen transport, hydrogen compression, hydrogen storage, it's a pain, right? So the figure we play with is that typically these three categories add between 80 and 300% to the hydrogen generation cost. So if we do not sort this out, then many of the usages that are being considered today for hydrogen, we don't think they will become a reality. So I think this is something that is oftentimes forgotten, but it will become a very, very practical issue in the midterm. Perhaps to add on the European perspective, there is a belief that is becoming more and more real in Europe, which is that if we are talking about a low-carbon hydrogen economy, there will be a lot of the hydrogen that will be used in Europe that won't be produced in Europe. So again, the transport part of the equation is something that needs to be sorted out. Otherwise, there won't be enough low-carbon hydrogen in Europe available to meet the needs.
Yeah, got it. And so Val, as you think about just that similar question, but in the vein of what you're doing, what are the airlines telling you, the ones that are most excited about hydrogen and fuel cells, the ones that are less so or maybe more skeptical? How are you balancing that? Will you just maybe give us some insight in terms of your specific market?
It's a great point from Pete on transportation and sort of light-duty vehicles, and ironically enough, that's where the hydrogen push started from, mostly by Toyota and some other manufacturers. And really early on, as we were building the company, we looked at all kinds of transportation and sort of plotted them on the energy density required and the utilization scale, and it was clear that light-duty vehicles are the worst possible starting point, and that's why the initial start of the hydrogen transportation was a false start, basically, right? And if you take all the different types of transportation plot on the chart, you find that commercial aircraft is on the top right. Yeah, so 14 hours a day in operation, and typical 737 MAX aircraft is up to 40% of the total takeoff mass is fuel. So the extreme energy density. And the higher energy density required, the higher utilization, the more hydrogen is the best option. Right, so aviation, commercial aviation, scheduled service is the best possible use case for hydrogen. So this is our constant message to the energy markets and energy players, and that's why we have some energy companies as our investor base, is focus on aviation as one of your top use cases. So with the airlines, the infrastructure is invariably one of the top questions. So how are you going to make sure that this hydrogen is available at all these locations? Now, in aviation, again, this question is much easier to answer than in all other kinds of transportation, because you have very limited number of airports, commercial airports. In the United States, for example, 97% of the traffic is carried through just 150 locations. And airplanes can only fuel there. So contrast that with the light-duty vehicles, consumer cars. You just have to blanket large areas of the country with fuel infrastructure, which costs tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. In our case, we have airlines that can have profitable operations with just 2 locations, some of them with 1, when you refuel at the base and then you do the out and back type of transport. So with those airlines, we were able to convert them into this hydrogen future vision, and over 2,000 engines on pre-order now, $10 billion worth of future revenues.
That's great. Shifting a little bit to thinking about where government plays a role. How important of an unlock or regulations are government? Hydrogen's gotten a lot of support in the US, in particular with the IRA. I know there's been a lot of investment in Europe and Asia on infrastructure. Where are we from that perspective? Is there an ask? What would really unlock your business, each of you, from a governmental perspective? We can just kind of go down. Pete?
You should go first.
Or you go, Val.
All right, we can do reverse stack.
I'll have
here.
rebuttal.
Yeah. No, so aviation is, of course, a very regulated industry, right, for good reasons. We don't want airplanes fall out of the sky and all those things. So regulator is very important to us. We now have engines in certification in the UK and the US. We've been working with regulators for the last 5 years, since our first test flights in 2019. We've also been engaging with the government stakeholders throughout the chain, so to speak, from the legislature, which is very important, driving things like what the regulators will do over the next 5 years. So example of the work that we've done, engaged with Congress quite a bit in the US, and helped drive the what's called FAA Reauthorization Act, that basically specifies what Federal Aviation Administration has to focus on for the next 5 years. Then working with the bodies like Jet Zero Council here in the UK, that was set up by the administration here to bring industry and the government together to figure out the future of aviation. We are one of the very few startups on that forum, and constantly drive the thinking there. So I think engagement from the thought leaders, engagement from the innovators like ourselves is very, very important for these government bodies, for these regulators to really get into the future, right? Because a lot of times what we found is that in the regulator at the government agency, especially the mid-level, is very excited about what we're doing, but it needs that push from the top in order to actually make things real. So that engagement from the top is very important.
Great. Andrés?
Yeah, what I would say is perhaps a little bit more focus, right? At least in my perspective, the way that we have seen things in Europe is that perhaps because of hydrogen being a bit overhyped, the regulators have been throwing subsidies a little bit all over the place, and losing a bit of sight about how long it will take to scale the whole thing up. So especially in Europe, when we take a look at the figures that have been announced, And I think these figures have not been very good for the sector, and today we are suffering from this hype that was created in a bit of an unnecessary manner. So I think we have now, as a sector, also identified where the lowest hanging fruits are, and that is what I would like us, at least as a continent in Europe, to focus on, to make sure that we can grasp the quick wins, you know, and to have some real successes.
Great. Pete?
So both Europe and the US have passed laws and regulations that support clean hydrogen in different ways. And when Coloma was founded, the IRA in the US had not been passed. And we didn't actually know it was going to come. We were actually pretty bearish on something coming. Of course, when that came out, geologic hydrogen was not a topic of conversation. There was no language in the IRA that disqualified it, but there was also no language that specifically named it as a known path. So the immediate need for us was to just make sure, hey, this and other new technologies are probably coming down the pipeline. Let's make sure something that was intended to be technology agnostic is, in fact, technology agnostic. And so I'd say the key thing from my perspective for government agencies is look to do the math. Do the math, do the science. Let's stay as technology agnostic as possible and keep our eyes on the goal of CO2 reduction. Luckily, geologic hydrogen has been widely adopted, and both sides of the aisle in the US are very excited about it. We went in front of the Senate at a hearing. Great acceptance, great enthusiasm from the DOE. So we're in good shape on that. But my view is that there's going to be other things that come down as well, both in hydrogen and other things, and a technology agnostic approach is just critical. You know, you kind of see this in Europe in hydrogen because Europe is not very interested, the EU is not very interested in natural gas-derived hydrogen, even if it's blue hydrogen with great carbon capture, because there's a natural gas problem in Europe. You know, they don't want to keep getting gas from Russia. And so the regulations in Europe actually are pretty specifically geared towards electrolyzed hydrogen, which is okay because nobody knew about geologic hydrogen. So I think Europe has some catching up to do if this field grows to make sure that you know, they're subsidizing everything equally. From my perspective, far better to have no subsidies than unevenly applied subsidies that basically pick winners, pick losers, because that's really anti-innovation. Something's going to come along that's even better than what we're doing at some point if governments set up regulations and carrots in the right way. And so that's, I think, the big thing. The other thing is just permitting, right? You cannot get through the energy transition. You cannot cause a clean energy industrial revolution without permitting new infrastructure. And so, you know, to the degree regulators and governments can help out in that, it's really accelerating permitting.
That's great. Well, I think we're under the minute mark, so maybe we can just end with like a fun long bet. I don't know, I'll do a plug for if there's a bar in San Francisco called Intervale. I think that's what it's called, and they've got a book of long bets. People make a prognostication, and people take either side. It's really interesting to look at what, you know, how views have changed over time. If I were to say to the three of you, in 2050, take, you know, a super major oil company, let's say ExxonMobil, if a third of their revenue is going to come from the extraction of a resource that is not a hydrocarbon, so it can be lithium, hydrogen, even carbon. So by 2050, will a third of revenue for ExxonMobil be a non-hydrocarbon? Would you take that bet? So who here would that 30% will come from non-hydrocarbon? Anybody?
So a combination of all the other non-hydrocarbons?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd take that bet. Yeah.
Andres? 2050.
I would, because I like betting, but, yeah, I'd have to be prudent.
Val?
I don't think so. I'm not for that one.
Yeah. So about 2040. So 2040, Pete.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. All right. Wow. This is a hometown crowd for that kind of a bet, so it tells you how hard this is. But thank you guys for joining us. Thank you all. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this insightful discussion. We have one more Spotlight Solution segment for you, and we're going to welcome on stage now Barclay Rogers. He's the CEO of Graphite. Please welcome.
Let's hope I don't fall down the stairs. All right, so my name is Barclay Rogers, founder and CEO of Graphite. We're in the durable carbon removal space. So what that really is about is taking carbon dioxide out of the air and storing it permanently so it doesn't re-enter the atmosphere. I'm going to start this by saying, like, nuclear fusion, this is not. It's actually a really straightforward process. So if you think about what's happening in atmospheric CO2 levels, you got roughly 400 parts per million. That's 0.04% solution. And if you're going to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, you somehow have to separate the CO2 from atmospheric air. So what we're doing is we're using plants to do that hard work. Plants are naturally capturing CO2 through photosynthesis, right? But the issue, of course, is that material, the carbon captured in the biomass, is returned back to the atmosphere when the biomass decomposes, right? So what are we looking to do? We're essentially looking to halt microbial or biomass decomposition. So then the question is, well, what's breaking down biomass? It's microbes. What do microbes need to live? They need water. If you can take the water away and keep the water away, you can keep the biomass preserved forever, keep the carbon out of the atmosphere forever. So this is what it looks like, right? So this is literally agricultural and timber residues. So think about sawdust from a timber mill. Think about rice hulls and rice straw from agricultural processes. There's about 50% carbon in that material, right? And what we're doing is we're taking it and following these very simple steps, right? So number one, we collect the material, again, taking the other byproducts from agricultural and timber, bring it to our processing facility. We grind it up, right? We then dry it down. We go below a certain moisture content level. And below that level, microbes can no longer survive. We then condense it, basically, into these blocks. We'll make bigger blocks over time. This is from our initial pilot line, and we're making bigger blocks very soon. We then encase it. Again, remember, this is all about keeping it dry, right? And so this is essentially a waterproof bag, right? It's very similar to a mylar material, right? So you want to keep the water out of the biomass for a very long period of time. So this layer is designed to last for more than 1,000 years, right? We then take these and we put them underground, right? So I like to call it a little carbon tomb. So it's a hole in the ground. It's lined with a waterproof barrier, right? You then place the blocks on top of that. On top of that, you put another barrier, okay? You fuse those two barriers together, so you essentially have redundancy in the system, right? Keeping water out of it. But the nice bit about that, if you go back and if you think about carbon dioxide removal, and particularly of the durable variety, right? You have to do two things. One is you need to measure the amount of carbon out. It's pretty straightforward in our process, right? You can literally weigh the blocks. You can determine the carbon content of that material. You'll get simple mathematics to get the ton CO2 removed, so much so that there's a sticker on the blocks that say how many tons of carbon were removed on what day, right? But then on the verification side, ensuring that it is not released back into the atmosphere, go back to our carbon tomb. It's a sealed chamber. There's a valve on that chamber. You essentially open the valve, you pull the entombed gases out, you measure the CO2 methane levels, no greater than background concentrations, no leak. You can measure that out every hour of the day so you can prove that the system is not leaking. But that's what we do, but I'm actually not going to talk much about what we do because I want to kind of make more of a policy point, really going off of the point that Pete made just a minute ago about the sort of technology neutral policy and even sort of buying framework. So I'll just hit a few facts really fast. Number one, this is CO2 concentrations. You guys all know that. In the United States, emissions, essentially been flat for the last 30 years. We actually haven't made much progress in bringing them down. We've grown the economy a lot in that period, but emissions are staying pretty constant. And then third, in the carbon removal space, the scientific community is calling for on the order of 350 million tons of CO2 removed per year, and we're on the order of 250,000 tons removed in the durable category today. So we got a really long way to go. The main thing I want to hit on today is we need to start acting now, right? And I want to talk about sort of some policy approaches that can get us there. But this is just a quick snapshot. I was super interested when I saw this data. And so this is a combination of data coming off of the voluntary carbon market. Those are the bars in green. And then the gray bars of the US Department of Energy had something called the CDR purchase prize, where they bought various forms of carbon dioxide removal. And what you can see is this is sort of normalizes their sort of deliveries or promised deliveries over the next 10 years or so, normalized by percent of total volume. And what you're seeing is biomass-based solutions are clearly leading the way, okay? And there's interesting sort of alignment between the voluntary carbon market data and the DOE data, in that they all agree in sort of the orders, if you will, or come close to agreeing in the orders with respect to the different technologies and the amount of volume. And also see over on the, the right-hand side, the prices, both in the DOE purchase price and the CDR industry data. So biomass-based solutions are also the lowest cost solutions. So you got a volume and price leader that's emerged. But the really interesting thing about it is, I like to call it a dark horse, right? Like very few people know this, like very few people talk about this, right? We talk about a lot of CDR technologies, but we don't talk much about biomass-based technologies. Now, I'll just show you a couple of facts to sort of make the case, right? Look in the United States, right? We've got the Inflation Reduction Act had a $3.5 billion deployment on regional direct air capture hubs. Any biomass-based carbon removal hubs in the IRA? Nope, right? Tax code, $85 a ton for industrial carbon capture and storage, $180 a ton for direct air capture. Any tax credits for biomass-based solutions? Nope. So it's this question. It's like, well, why aren't we backing the dark horse? Like, what is it that, we're missing? And so let me just see if I can get to the point, right? The key idea, and I believe in this idea, don't get me wrong, right? The idea is we can drive down, the cost of various technologies by investing in them today. I think that is true. Right? But I also want to just hit on the thing where we've seen actually the most progress, because we've done some of that, but what we've mostly done is encourage deployment, right? We've encouraged deployment of renewables. So this is just quickly what you can see is we grew electricity generation in the United States by about 25% over the last 30 years or so. Emissions dropped by about 40% from their peak over that same period. We did it by deploying a lot of renewables and a lot of natural gas to replace carbon-intensive coal. Right, the way I like to talk about this is we bet on the horses that we knew could run, right, while also betting on the power of innovation. And so what I'd ask of the broader community here, and this could be investors, it could be buyers, it could be policymakers, is we really need to think about a both-and approach, right? This is not going to be solved, I don't think, exclusively by focusing on driving down the cost of what are currently high-cost technologies, and we'll solve the deployment solution, problem later. I think we need to also have a both-and approach. That is, we need to not only invest in cost down, but we also need to invest in deployment. That's what we did in renewables. That's why we've seen so much renewable deployment. That's why we've made progress. We can do the same thing in the CDR industry. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This marks the end of our session. Thank you very much. In 15 minutes, the afternoon plenary starts. This room will be used as a broadcast of that session, so we do need to ask you to clear the room. Thank you so much.